10 most dangerous prisoners. Inside Louisiana State Penitentiary, Angola. Deep in Louisiana lies the largest maximum security prison in America. The Louisiana State Penitentiary, Angola. Once a slave plantation, today it cages over 6,000 men, the majority serving life without parole. Over the decades, it's been called the Alcatraz of the South, a place where violence, gangs, and despair shaped daily life. New York Times, 2018. But who were the most dangerous men ever locked inside Angola's gates? In this documentary, we reveal 10 prisoners whose crimes, influence, or notoriety made them unforgettable. Every story you'll hear is backed by court records, official reports, or reputable news sources. Stay with us until the end, because the last name may shock you. Before we dive into today's powerful story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more gripping tales. Your support helps us keep sharing these stories, and we wouldn't want you to miss any of the action. Now, let's get started. 10. Vincent Simmons, the fighter who wouldn't quit. Vincent Simmons entered Angola in 1977, convicted of attempted aggravated rape. His sentence, 100 years without parole, Louisiana Court Records, 1977. From the beginning, Simmons declared his innocence. For decades, he filed motion after motion, lawsuit after lawsuit, battling the justice system from inside Angola's walls. According to the Associated Press, 2019, he even staged hunger strikes, actions that branded him a disruptive and dangerous presence to prison authorities. In 2022, after 44 years, a judge vacated his conviction and Simmons walked free, NBC News, 2022. Inside Angola, his danger wasn't violence, it was his defiance. He became a symbol of resistance in a prison designed to crush it. Wilbert Rideau, the most rehabilitated dangerous man. In 1961, 19-year-old Wilbert Rideau murdered a bank teller during a failed robbery. Convicted of murder, he was originally sentenced to death. When Louisiana's death penalty law was struck down in the 1970s, his sentence was commuted to life. Louisiana Supreme Court Records, 1973. Inside Angola, Rideau reinvented himself. He became editor of the Angolite, the prison's official magazine, winning national awards for journalism. But guards and victims' families never forgot his crime. His dual reputation, respected journalist yet convicted murderer, made him one of Angola's most complex figures. PBS Frontline, 1994. After multiple retrials, Rideau was released in 2005 on a manslaughter conviction. Even in freedom, his name remained tied forever to Angola. Robert Lee Willie, the predator on death row. Convicted of the 1980 kidnapping, rape, and murder of an 18-year-old woman, Robert Lee Willie was sent to Angola's death row, Louisiana Court Records, 1980. During trial, witnesses said Willie laughed and mocked the process. The Advocate, 1984. His lack of remorse earned him infamy among both guards and prisoners. Sister Helen Prejean, who counseled him, later wrote Dead Man Walking, a book that exposed the realities of capital punishment. Willie was executed in 1984 by electrocution. His case defined Angola's death row in the public imagination. The Angola Three: Albert Woodfox, Herman Wallace, and Robert King. In 1972, 3 Black Panther Party members, Albert Woodfox, Herman Wallace, and Robert King, were accused of killing guard Brent Miller. Woodfox and Wallace were convicted and sentenced to life in solitary. King was later convicted in a separate prison crime, New York Times, 2013. The men became known worldwide as the Angola Three. Amnesty International called their treatment cruel and inhumane. Herman Wallace's conviction was overturned in 2013, but he died 3 days later. Albert Woodfox was freed in 2016 after serving 43 years in solitary confinement, the longest in U.S. history. BBC News, 2016. Robert King was released in 2001. To prison officials, they were too dangerous to be allowed into general population. To activists, they became symbols of injustice. Either way, their names are forever etched into Angola's violent legacy. Gerald Bordelon, the child predator. Gerald Bordelon was convicted in 2002 for the kidnapping and murder of his 12-year-old stepdaughter. The details of the case were so disturbing that prosecutors sought the death penalty. According to The Advocate, 2009, Bordelon shocked the court by waiving his right to appeal, openly stating he wanted to be executed. Inside Angola, Bordelon's presence was chilling. Prison officials considered him unpredictable, both violent and manipulative. In 2010, he was executed by lethal injection, becoming the first Louisiana inmate executed in more than a decade, Associated Press 2010. His case marked Angola not just as a prison of lifers, but as the endpoint for the most irredeemable offenders. 5. Donald Frank, the Angola escape artist. Donald Frank was serving time for multiple armed robberies when he became notorious for one thing: escape attempts. According to Louisiana Department of Corrections records, Frank masterminded at least 3 escape plots during the 1980s and 1990s. One of his most famous attempts involved tunneling out of a dormitory, only to be caught before reaching the outer fences. Guards labeled him a constant threat to security. Each time he was caught, his punishments grew harsher: long stints in solitary, loss of privileges, and tighter surveillance. Though not the most violent inmate at Angola, Frank's reputation as a persistent escape artist earned him a place among the prison's most dangerous. His actions forced Angola to rethink its already intense security measures. Henry Montgomery, the man who changed juvenile sentencing. In 1963, at just 17 years old, Henry Montgomery shot and killed East Baton Rouge Deputy Charles Hurt. He was convicted of murder and sentenced to life without parole. Louisiana Supreme Court records, 1964. For decades, Montgomery lived in Angola, known as a quiet but dangerous reminder of how young offenders could still commit deadly crimes. But his case became nationally significant when it reached the U.S. Supreme Court. In Montgomery v. Louisiana, 2016, the court ruled that its earlier decision banning mandatory life without parole for juveniles had to be applied retroactively. This landmark ruling affected thousands of inmates across the country. New York Times, 2016. Montgomery was eventually released in 2021 after nearly 60 years behind bars. Though not a gang leader or a notorious killer inside Angola, his case shaped national law, and his crime ensured his reputation as one of the prison's most infamous men. Thomas Silverstein, federal transfer, a name that struck fear while prim. Airily held in federal prisons, notorious Aryan Brotherhood leader Thomas Silverstein was temporarily transferred through Angola during the height of federal crackdowns in the 1980s. According to Bureau of Prisons reports, Silverstein had already been convicted of multiple murders of inmates and correctional officers. At Angola, his reputation preceded him. Prison staff treated him as one of the most dangerous men alive. Though his stay was brief, inmates who crossed paths with him recalled the tension. Guards kept him in near total isolation, fearing he could spark racial or gang-related violence. Silverstein would later die in federal custody in 2019, but his time at Angola underscored the prison's role as a holding ground for America's most extreme prisoners. Herman Ashworth, a brief but deadly stay, convicted of a brutal 1996 murder in Ohio, Herman Ashworth requested to be executed and waived his appeals, much like Gerald Bordelon. While on death row, he was briefly housed at Angola during a transfer period. According to Times-Picayune archives, Ashworth was considered a high-risk inmate due to his volatile behavior and repeated outbursts toward guards. Though his time at Angola was short, it added to the prison's roster of men who actively courted death. Ashworth was executed in Ohio in 2005. His presence in Angola was a reminder that the prison often acted as a temporary fortress for the nation's most uncontrollable men. The Angola Five, the ultimate prison murder, perhaps the most infamous incident in Angola's modern history, was the case of the Angola Five. In 1999, 5 inmates, David Brown, Barry Edge, Jeffrey Clark, Anthony Causey, and Hazen Williams, attempted to escape. In the process, they brutally murdered prison security officer Captain David Knapps, New York Times, 2000. The escape failed, and all 5 were tried for murder. The crime shook Angola to its core, highlighting the deadly risks guards faced every day. Several of the Angola Five received death sentences, while others were condemned to life in solitary confinement. According to court records, their crime remains one of the bloodiest in Angola's history, a moment when inmates proved they could strike directly at the heart of the system. Vincent Simmons, the fighter who wouldn't quit. In 1977, a 25-year-old black man named Vincent Simmons stood trial in Avoyelles Parish, Louisiana. He was accused of attempting to rape twin 14-year-old white girls. The trial lasted a single day. No physical evidence was presented, and Simmons was not allowed to call witnesses on his behalf. The jury deliberated less than an hour before finding him guilty. His sentence, 100 years without parole, Louisiana Court Records, 1977. For the rest of his life, Simmons insisted he was innocent. He said he had been framed and convicted in a racially biased justice system. Life at Angola. When Simmons arrived at Angola, he entered a world dominated by lifers, men who knew they would never leave. Angola in the late 1970s and 1980s was infamous for violence, gang control, and corruption. According to the New York Times, 1980s coverage, stabbings, rapes, and assaults were frequent, and the guards often looked the other way. Simmons, however, was different from many other prisoners. He was not known as a fighter or gang leader. Instead, his danger came from his unrelenting defiance. Angola officials described him as a paper warrior, constantly filing appeals, lawsuits, and motions. Each new legal filing was a challenge to the authority of the prison and the Louisiana justice system itself. He staged hunger strikes, demanding better treatment and attention to his case, Associated Press, 2019. For prison administrators, Simmons wasn't dangerous with a weapon. He was dangerous with persistence. The turning point. In the 1990s and 2000s, Simmons gained support from activists, lawyers, and journalists who began to dig into the flaws in his case. According to NBC News 2022, the twins who accused him had never been medically examined. Police records that could have supported Simmons' alibi had been suppressed. By the 2010s, the case was being re-examined. Simmons had already spent over 40 years inside Angola, but he continued to say, "I am innocent. I should not be here." Freedom after 44 years. In February 2022, Simmons finally got what he had fought for. His conviction was vacated by a Louisiana judge. After more than 44 years, he walked out of Angola a free man. NBC News 2022. When asked about his time inside, Simmons said he had no regrets about fighting the system. His release did not erase the decades lost, but it proved that his persistence had shaken Angola to its core. For prison officials, Simmons had been a thorn in their side. For supporters, he was proof that the justice system could fail. For Angola's history, he remains one of the most dangerous men, not because of violence, but because he refused to be broken. Wilbert Rideau, the most rehabilitated, dangerous man. In 1961, a 19-year-old black teenager named Wilbert Rideau committed a crime that would haunt Louisiana for decades. On a Friday morning in Lake Charles, he walked into a local bank, armed with a small handgun. He forced 3 employees into his car. The kidnapping ended in horror. One of the women, bank teller Julia Ferguson, was shot and killed. Rideau was arrested within hours. In a racially charged trial, an all-white jury convicted him of murder. He was sentenced to death in the electric chair. Louisiana Supreme Court Records, 1961. At the time, few expected this teenager, barely out of high school, to live long inside Angola. But Rideau's story would take a very different turn. Life on death row. When Rideau first entered Angola, he was housed on death row, a small, isolated wing where inmates awaited execution. According to the Times-Picayune, 1962, conditions were harsh. Prisoners spent nearly all their time in their cells. Many were executed within a few years. But Rideau's sentence was caught in a wave of legal change. In the early 1970s, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down Louisiana's death penalty statute. Dozens of condemned men, including Rideau, had their sentences commuted to life in prison. Louisiana Supreme Court Records, 1973. Instead of dying in the chair, Rideau would live out his years in Angola. That shift changed everything. Found the making of a prison journalist. In the 1970s, Angola began allowing prisoners to publish the Angolite, an official prison magazine. It was meant to be a rehabilitative project. Rideau, with no formal training but an interest in writing, was invited to join the staff. What happened next was historic. Under Rideau's leadership, the Angolite became one of the most respected prison publications in America. His articles exposed violence, corruption, sexual abuse, and the brutal realities of life inside Angola. In 1980, the Angolite published a groundbreaking report on prison rape, something almost never discussed in public at the time. The article shocked readers across the nation, the Angolite 1980 archived. Rideau's work earned national awards, including the George Polk Award, and recognition from the American Bar Association. He became known as the most rehabilitated prisoner in America. PBS Frontline, 1994. Still a dangerous man. Despite his achievements, prison officials and victims' families never forgot his crime. To them, Rideau was not a journalist. He was still a murderer. Guards described him as a man with influence, a prisoner whose words could sway public opinion far beyond Angola's walls. In a prison built on silence, Rideau's voice was dangerous. He embarrassed the Louisiana Department of Corrections by exposing abuse, cover-ups, and corruption. Some wardens admired his work. Others tried to shut him down. But the Angolite under Rideau kept publishing, even when stories angered officials. The long road to freedom, Rideau's legal team fought for decades, arguing that his original 1961 trial had been unconstitutional. 3 separate times, federal courts overturned his conviction due to racial bias and flawed procedures, Fifth Circuit Court records 1969 to 1990s. But each time, Louisiana retried him. Finally, in 2005, after more than 40 years behind bars, Rideau was tried again. This time, the jury convicted him not of murder, but of manslaughter. He was sentenced to time served. At the age of 63, Rideau walked out of Angola a free man. Associated Press, 2005. Legacy. Today, Wilbert Rideau is remembered as one of the most famous prisoners in Angola's history. To some, he is proof that people can change, that a murderer can become a respected journalist. To others, he is a dangerous criminal who should never have been released. What cannot be denied is his impact. Through the Angolite, Rideau forced America to see what really happened inside Angola. And in doing so, he became one of the most dangerous men the prison ever held. Not for his fists or his crimes behind bars, but for his ability to expose the truth. The Angola Five, the ultimate prison murder. In the late 1990s, Angola was already known as one of the most violent prisons in the United States. But on December 28, 1999, the prison erupted in one of its darkest chapters. 5 inmates, David Brown, Barry Edge, Jeffrey Clark, Anthony Causey, and Hazen Williams, launched a desperate escape attempt. According to the New York Times, 2000, the men lured Captain David Knapps, a veteran security officer, into their unit. What followed was brutal. Knapps was beaten and strangled to death. The plan was to use his uniform and keys to break free of Angola's sprawling, high-security compound, but the escape collapsed almost instantly. Guards discovered the attack, sealed off the cell block, and the 5 men surrendered after hours of tense negotiations. The aftermath. The murder of Captain Knapps shook Angola to its core. For decades, prison staff had lived under the shadow of inmate violence. But this killing was different. A correctional officer had been targeted and executed as part of a coordinated plot. Warden Burl Cain described it as the most chilling moment of his career. The state of Louisiana vowed to make an example of the attackers. According to court records, multiple trials followed. David Brown and Barry Edge were sentenced to death. Jeffrey Clark and Anthony Causey received life sentences. Hazen Williams was also sentenced to life. Several remain on death row to this day. Why the Angola Five still matter? The case of the Angola Five highlighted the razor-thin line between order and chaos inside America's largest maximum security prison. It showed that even with layers of razor wire, gun towers, and armed patrols, the system could still be pierced from the inside. For prison officials, The murder was a call to increase surveillance, lockdowns, and control. For Angola's reputation, it cemented the idea that some of the most dangerous men in the country were housed within its walls. Even today, the name Angola 5 remains a warning of what can happen when desperation, violence, and opportunity collide. From Vincent Simmons' relentless fight for freedom, to Wilbert Rideau's transformation into a journalist, to the Angola 5's deadly escape attempt, the Louisiana State Penitentiary has been home to some of the most dangerous and unforgettable prisoners in American history. Each man's story reflects something larger: injustice, violence, survival or transformation. And together, they tell us why Angola remains one of the most notorious prisons in the world. If you found this documentary eye-opening, hit the like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more untold stories from inside the world's most infamous prisons.